Artificial Sun, Chapter 15. The sky outside Ameera's tent was a pale orange as dawn broke the day. She was in front of the vanity in her tent, brushing her hair. It had been a while since she was able to look at herself in the mirror, and only then did she notice how tired she truly was. The first month in the north weakened the fledglings, and although being with the Battlemen wasn't ideal, Ameera couldn't help but prefer it. The festivities ended a month and a half ago, and everyone seemed to be appreciating their stay, all but Althea and Bayard, who still didn't trust Luthor and the Battlemen. Shadows passed by Ameera's tent, and she could unmistakably identify the gorillas rushing past, grunting and playing with one another. They had grown remarkably, and were bigger than their master. Althea tried to keep them close, but with their ever-growing size, their taste for mischief seemed to multiply. Nobody was prepared for how quickly they would grow, and it begged the question of how big they would eventually get. Ameera couldn't help the thoughts that traveled back to Pelennor. He was tiny when he died. He barely reached her knees. He was the smallest of the four, and was always picked on by his siblings. She wondered how big he would have been at that moment. Would his patterns have brightened like bows, or stretched out like Leona's? Would he be as fat as Longclaw, or as lazy? Ameera swallowed the lump in her throat when someone appeared by the entrance of her tent. She placed her brush down and turned to see Lyra, who was smiling softly.
"Sorry to disturb you,"
Lyra said, her eyes finding the ground. Ameera stood up, and the brown dress she wore flowed down to her knees as she did so. She wore a dress on most days, though on days of training or hunting she would wear a tunic and trousers. When she wore the dress, she looked beautiful and ladylike, much like how she felt.
"Never."
She shook her head, and with a smile.
"What is it you need?"
Lyra bowed her head slightly.
"Chieftain Luthor requested that you take a morning stroll with him."
Ameera's heart dropped. For the past month, Luthor hadn't bothered with the fledglings. He let them train and eat and drink without disturbance. What changed? And why had he called on her and not Althea?
"Thank you for letting me know, Lyra."
Ameera's gentle smile never left her lips as she reached for her white coat made out of wolf furs. She slipped the coat onto her shoulders and walked towards Lyra.
"Where am I to meet him?"
"He said he will come here."
Lyra said before she smiled wearily.
"The chieftain has never requested a woman to walk with him."
"I'm honored."
Ameera lied before she urged Lyra away.
"You should go before he gets here. He seems like an impatient man."
An impatient man indeed, a voice said behind Lyra, who stepped aside. Luthor stood a few paces away from the tent, his expression unreadable. Lyra bowed her head and scampered off, which Luthor paid no mind to, as he stepped forward and extended his arm for Ameera to take. "Shall we?" Ameera studied the man before her. His skin was unscarred and tanned despite the lack of sunlight the north bestowed. His dark hair was tied back, and his thick brows rested on top of hard brown eyes. He was a crude man that couldn't be trusted, evident in his demeanor, but Ameera knew better than to turn down his offer for a walk, however suspicious it may be. She hooked her arm in his, and they began walking. When they walked through the camp, many eyes glanced at them, curious and shocked, but Luthor paid them no mind, only focused on his ulterior motives and the woman beside him.
"So,
Ameera began to speak when the many eyes on her made her uncomfortable.
May I ask what encouraged this request?
Do I need a reason to walk with one of my newest tribe members? Luthor asked almost immediately, a small smirk on his lips. He was taunting her, mocking her, and she refused to give in to him.
Of course not. Forgive me, chieftain.
She feigned hospitality, keeping her eyes ahead of her and refusing to look at him. The sound of chattering and laughter filled the space around them, and she looked around to see the villagers enjoying their morning together. Some men were fathers with wives and children. Others were arrogant, pompous, and misogynistic. The latter, fortunately, still seemed to be asleep. A pair of children, a boy and a girl, ran straight into Ameera. Their laughter and giggling ceased as they bumped into her. They looked up at her, scared and apologetic, but she smiled down at them.
Careful now.
Ameera steadied the girl by her shoulders. Their eyes panned to Luthor, who was scowling down at them, clearly upset.
We're sorry, Chieftain Luthor,
the boy said with a frightened voice. Before Luthor could voice his displeasure, Ameera spoke.
No harm was done. Run along now.
She dared to say, despite the nerves welling in her throat at the blatant disregard for the chieftain. When Ameera looked at Luthor, she saw he wasn't smiling. They should be punished, he said as they started walking again. He hooked his arm with hers again, more forcefully now.
They're children. They were playing.
She looked back at the children as they laughed and chased one another before she faced Luthor again.
You were a child once too.
Luthor didn't say anything, but his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. They walked through the village in silence before he spoke again. The real reason I asked you to walk with me is because I'd like to invite you to go hunting with me later on. Ameera furrowed her brows in confusion.
But I thought the hunting party was sent out yesterday.
According to her knowledge, the hunters had brought back enough meat to feed the entire village for at least a week. Yes, but this is not that sort of hunt, he said. I'm hunting to clear my mind, and while I prefer hunting alone, I am in need of a companion. Who better than one of my new allies?
Why not Althea then? Or one of the men?
Ameera's question irritated Luthor. She was too curious, and he needed her compliant if he wanted to gain information on the fledglings. Ameera was the most innocent and naive out of the group. He had taken his time to observe them all, and he wanted to use that to his advantage. He just had to bide his time and gain her trust. Your men joined yesterday's hunt. And regarding Althea, he sighed softly. It wouldn't be a peaceful hunt if she were to join me. Ameera chuckled slightly, then met his eyes.
Very well. I will join you on the condition that I be the one to do the hunting.
Luthor frowned. Were all their women strong-willed and demanding? It's tradition that the men of the tribe do the hunting, he replied with a forced smile. Ameera was riling him up, but it wasn't in the same taunting way as Althea and Flynn. It was light-hearted and innocent.
I thought this was a different kind of hunt.
She asked with a coy smile before she halted, causing Luthor to stop as well.
Let's make a deal. If I can best you at one-on-one combat, I get to hunt. If you win, I won't fret any longer.
I'm not one for games. Luthor narrowed his eyes, though he couldn't deny his intrigue, as he gave her a once-over. You would fight, even in a dress and wolfskins.
Should the advantage not make you eager to win?
She asked with a glint in her eyes. Luthor chuckled and raised his brow before nodding. If you insist. But it goes against my morals to fight it. Before Luthor could finish his sentence, Ameera pressed an attack, pulling out her bullwhip in the process. Luthor quickly dodged the attack and pulled out his own weapon, but he only held one of his 2 axes. They had exchanged blows, none aimed to harm. It was almost as if they were dancing, and Ameera's fond laughter was contrary to the intense sparring match. It wasn't long before a crowd formed around the tired and breathless duo as they continued to exchange parries and blows. The dance came to an end with the tip of Luthor's axe inches from Ameera's throat. He had a smugness on his lips at the notion that he'd won. Luthor's eyes held a grudging respect, which he quickly tried to hide with the tilt of his head. You won't fret any longer? Ameera shifted her gaze down, and only when Luthor followed her line of sight did he see the pocket knife pressed to his abdomen. He looked up to meet her eyes, and instead of defeat or disgust, the corners of his lips turned up to a surprised but impressed smile. When Luthor noticed the crowd that had formed around them, he sobered up and pulled back, an unreadable expression on his face. He withdrew his axe and stepped away with a completely different disposition than the one he had shown during their fight.
It appears we are evenly matched,
Ameera said as she pocketed her knife and rolled her whip up to return to her coat. Being evenly matched with a woman was disgraceful, yet when Luthor looked at Ameera and saw the pride and excitement in her eyes, the shame he felt dwindled. The sliver of a smile crept onto his lips, beautifying him instantly. It appears so. He nodded and took another step back, as if the physical distance would clear his head. Excuse me. I have duties to attend to, but I'll see you later for the hunt. Ameera nodded and watched Luthor retreat. As he walked away, the crowd parted and dispersed, but many whispered among themselves. The song that most sung was the fact that Ameera was accompanying Luthor on a hunt. It was late morning by the time the news reached Althea and Bayard's ears. The two found Ameera with Lyra, helping her sew some of the torn clothes of the villagers. The guerrillas walked by Althea's side, equivalent in height to Bayard, though looking more like bodyguards than the cubs they were.
Ameera?
Bayard nodded politely in greeting, though the worry was evident in his eyes and the crease between his eyebrows.
A word?
Ameera stood and excused herself from Lyra with a warm smile. They walked a few paces before Ameera spoke.
I take it you found out about the hunt?
So the rumors are true then?
Althea asked with concern in her eyes.
Rumors are just that.
Ameera sighed and tried to bite back a smile when she said,
Though in this case, they're true.
And you accepted?
Bayard asked, confused. He didn't trust the Battlemen. From the moment he appeared before Luthor, he knew he could trust the man as far as he could throw him.
Was I supposed to decline?
Ameera asked. Was it truly wise to deny the man who was feeding them, clothing them, and protecting them when he could have killed them a long time ago? Their lives were in Luthor's hands, and she hoped Althea and Bayard could see that.
No, of course not.
Althea shook her head before she exhaled a sigh.
It's just... Luthor is dangerous. I don't trust him.
I don't either.
Ameera said.
But if he actually wanted to hurt me, he would have done it earlier when we were sparring.
So that's true as well?
Althea looked taken aback, but Ameera nodded in spite of it. No fear or apprehension on her face.
It was my idea, actually.
Ameera said.
Just be careful, alright?
Bayard eventually said, frustration raging inside him. He was powerless here. He held no influence over his friends, or over what would happen to them.
You should take Longclaw.
Althea said with a wide grin. Longclaw looked up upon hearing his name. He had been seated not long after they arrived, and was playing with the spaces between his toes. Ameera frowned slightly. In some ways, she felt like taking Longclaw on the hunt was betraying Pellinnor's memory. She hadn't gotten close to any of the other gorillas since his death. She didn't want to. When Althea noticed Ameera's hesitation, she signaled for Longclaw to stand using some form of sign language. The gorilla obeyed and stood up. He linked his large hands with Althea, who stepped forward with an excited smile.
Longclaw hasn't exercised in a long time.
The gold-marked gorilla let out a mixture between a grunt and a laugh, as if he understood Althea's words.
He'll keep you safe if need be, and he's an amazing travel companion.
Althea held Longclaw's hand out for Ameera to take. The elementalist looked up at Longclaw, who was the biggest of the gorillas. His fur was a light black that almost looked silver, and his markings were intricate and beautiful. But the most beautiful thing about Longclaw was his deep and soulful eyes, which caused Ameera to concede. Ameera took Longclaw's hand, and he made sounds of excitement. When Ameera's attention was solely on Longclaw, Althea's smile dropped. Ameera's innocence made her easy prey for Luthor. Through her, he could gain leverage over the fledglings, leverage that could be their demise. And if they were to trust their lives in Ameera's two trusting hands, they were as good as doomed. It was midday when Luthor summoned Ameera for the hunt. His eyebrows raised questionably at the sight of Longclaw, but he said nothing. They walked for a while, side by side in comfortable silence. Luthor's crossbow looked light in his hand, despite the heaviness of it, making Ameera's own frame seem smaller than it was. Would now be a good time for me to ask why you brought company? Luthor looked down at Ameera as Longclaw glanced around the forest with curiosity in his large eyes. The chieftain didn't sound upset, but rather curious and amused.
Longclaw doesn't really get much exercise. He's very lazy.
Ameera said with a slight laugh. Upon hearing his name, Longclaw grunted and leaned his face down towards Ameera. The sheer size of him was intimidating, but he still had the heart of a cub. She leaned forward and scratched him between his ears and under his chin. The gorilla gleefully giggled before rushing ahead. Luthor examined Ameera carefully before he said, "Women, children, and animals."
What?
Ameera asked in confusion. "Those, I've noticed, are the ones you get along with well." His analytical gaze caused her to turn her face. "The ones who cannot fend for themselves." Ameera quickly turned back to him, offended.
Women can fend for themselves.
"Mine cannot."
Because of you.
Ameera bit before she could stop herself. Luthor clenched his jaw, and his eyes clouded over. "Careful now."
Apologies, Chieftain.
When Ameera's russet eyes met Luthor's mud-brown ones, he found his anger washed away against his better judgment. Frustrated, he changed the subject. During the gathering, I noticed you had a quarrel with one of your friends. I can't imagine anyone would dislike you. The forced compliment sounded strange on Luthor's tongue. Ameera's expression clouded over, but she tried to maintain her composure.
She wasn't my friend.
Neither were focused much on hunting anymore, and the supposed hunt morphed into a peaceful stroll. Remembering Lyra's story and the intimate knowledge Ameera had about Luthor's past, it only felt fair to give him a slight glimpse into her thoughts as well.
She killed someone very close to me.
The memories rushed back, her sobbing over Pelinor's body, wishing, praying that it was a nightmare. Luthor was well acquainted with loss and the pain it carried. His own father died not long ago, making Luthor the youngest and most inexperienced chieftain the Battlemen ever had. His mother died when he was very young, and although he didn't carry much memory of her, the lack of maternal care left an odd hole he had no idea how to close. And then there was her, his first and only love. Her loss left a pain so unbearable that it changed Luthor forever. Knowing that she died was one thing, but finding her defiled and lifeless body was a different kind of torture. He closed himself off after that, disguising his guardedness as a hatred for women. After all, he couldn't bear to look at anyone else with the love he had reserved for her, and only her. But now, with Ameera in front of him, the memory of his fire-kissed lover didn't seem to hurt all that much. Luthor shunned his thoughts and shifted his gaze to the forestry around them. Did you love them? The question barely landed before she nodded in response.
I did.
A wise man once told me that love is weakness. Luthor wasn't sure if he was telling Ameera, or if he was reminding himself of the words his father told him, warning himself not to get close.
Someone once told me that to know love is to know fear, and that to know strength is to love in spite of that fear.
She remembered Grunner's words as if it was yesterday. He once found Ameera crying over her fallen friends. She told him that she wished she didn't care, that it was easier that way. His response was the very one she now gave Luthor. Fear. Luthor's voice was quiet, as if he was testing the weight of the word on his tongue.
Fear of unrequited love. Fear of losing the ones you love.
She looked at him and said,
Fear of losing ourselves because of it. If we can love despite these fears, we are strong.
Luthor's lips curled into a barely perceptible smile. He felt the ice around his heart thaw, ever so slightly. I suppose you're right.
Quite the compliment you're giving a woman. Are you aware of that?
Ameera's smile was almost disarming, and Luthor discarded the topic of Azura and their quarrel for another day. For now he found comfort in her smile, and relished in her company. A twig snapped, severing the moment. It was so loud that even Longclaw paused. The leaves he had pulled from the trees along the way hovered inches from his pursed lips. Luthor approached the sound with careful steps. He saw a lone deer munching on the leaves of a nearby bush. He turned to Ameera and placed his finger over his lips to indicate that she should be quiet. He stepped forward carefully and raised the bow. He focused on the animal and took aim, but after hesitation, he lowered it and turned to Ameera, who had been standing behind him, watching carefully. She looked at him in confusion, but he nudged the bow closer to her nonetheless. "It was a tie," he said softly, and a bashful smile lit up Ameera's face as she crouched down beside him and took the bow from his grip. Their fingers brushed together. His chest fluttered, but he ignored it. "Have you used a crossbow before?" When Ameera turned to him, her cheeks heated up at how close they were. She turned her face away.
I haven't.
Luthor instructed her on how to hold it, and she got it almost immediately, if not for the fact that her arm was shaking slightly. "Relax." It was a single word, accompanied by a gentle grip on her arm, but it calmed her, most of her nerves directed inward now. Her shaking stopped, and she released the arrow. It soared through the sky and pierced through the neck of the deer. The creature fell to the floor, twitching and bleeding. Before Ameera and Luthor could celebrate their victory, Longclaw let out a roar of a scream and dropped his leaves to sprint to the deer.
What is he doing?
Ameera asked herself. They watched from a distance, neither bold enough to intercept Longclaw. He effortlessly snapped the arrowhead off and pulled the shaft out of the deer's neck, discarding it. His bloodied hands found the deer's neck, and he let out a series of grunts and huffs while he held it. It wasn't long before the deer was on its feet and frolicking away as quickly as possible. Longclaw healed him. When the gorilla returned, Ameera shouted at him.
Why did you do that?
She wasn't angry that he displayed kindness for the animal, but that he exposed his ability to Luthor. Longclaw responded with a series of motions and grunts that Ameera didn't understand. Panicked, she turned to read Luthor's face, but it was expressionless. "The gorilla's healed too?" he asked as he looked at her. This was what he needed. Leverage that would discredit Althea and merit the fledgling's death or exile. Ameera nodded.
They do, but please don't hurt them or us.
Her voice and eyes became desperate as Longclaw endured the intense gaze of Luthor. She grabbed his arm and squeezed it so that he was looking at her again. She wasn't a fool. She knew she couldn't trust Luthor. He would realize he no longer has use for Althea. Kill them all and imprison the gorillas. Yet a naive part of Ameera told her that he wasn't that person.
Please.
She pressed urgently. Luthor weighed his options. He could smite the thorn in his side and her people alike. But when he looked at Ameera, he hesitated. The leverage was not enough. He needed more. More information. More secrets. More time. With Ameera. Luthor nodded subtly. "I swear it. But nobody must know of this." Ameera nodded gratefully before she impulsively hugged Luthor. The hug was quick and over almost immediately, but the lingering scent of jasmine didn't leave Luthor. The scent of her wrapped around his brain like tendrils, clouding his rationale. On their way back, after Longclaw insisted on emptying a pouch of water to clean his hands, they came across a tree with low-hanging branches and thick leaves. Longclaw disappeared up it, not much later, which forced Ameera and Luthor to stop walking. "I thought you said this one is lazy," Luthor asked impatiently. Ameera sighed under her breath.
He usually is.
When Longclaw appeared again, he was holding 3 fruits in one hand. They were bright red color and were oval-shaped. He landed on the ground and handed one to Luthor, then one to Ameera, before taking a bite out of his own.
What are these?
Ameera asked, examining the weird red fruit she had never seen in her life. It's called the Crimson Heart of the North, Luthor explained. He sounded neither upset nor irritated. He sounded almost impressed. It represents kindness and love. Legend says that only those pure in heart could ever find it and taste the sweetness it possesses. Ameera turned the fruit in her hand, examining it. It was pretty, with a smooth, waxy surface. It wasn't a shock that Longclaw found it. If the legend was actually true, Leona and Bow would never have been able to find it. They weren't very kind or loving. Leona was harsh and crude, while Bow was protective and alert. Longclaw was jovial and friendly. Ameera wondered if Pellinor would have found it. At the sudden memory, Ameera swallowed down her sadness and bit into her fruit. It was sweet, but also soft, and the red nectar slid down her throat with the consistency of syrup. She nearly moaned at the taste, but refrained from it. When she pulled the fruit from her lips, they were coated red, as if blood had rushed to them. Luthor's fruit was paused inches from his mouth, but he didn't yet take a bite. He was fixated on the beautiful woman in front of him, but then a loud voice rang in his head, and with it, a forbidden image of his lost love. Love is weakness. The voice rang loudly, the voice of his father. I would prefer not to indulge in silly legends. Luthor's voice held no conviction as he discarded the Crimson Heart. It landed on the forest floor without making a sound. Love is weakness. Artificial Sun, Chapter 15.